Alan Greenspan, Alan Greenspan, the former chair of the Federal Reserve, he didn't even know what a derivative or a credit default swap was. Derivative, credit default swap. I'm just the chair of the Federal Reserve, the bank of all banks. Why should I know what a derivative or credit default swap is? Well, Alan Greenspan, it's really easy, okay? Alan Greenspan, listen up. A derivative is a financial security with a value that is relied upon or derived from an underlying asset or group of assets, a benchmark. The derivative itself is a contract between two or more parties, and the derivative derives its price from fluctuations in the underlying asset. It is easy, simple. That's a derivative. In a credit default swap, well, credit, that's not a debit. Default, that's not paid. Swap is switch, so just not debit, not paid, switch. A financial contract, this is what a credit default swap is. It's a financial contract whereby a buyer of corporate or sovereign debt in the form of bonds attempts to eliminate possible loss arising from default by the issuer of the bonds, ensuring the buyer's potential losses as part of the agreement. So there you go, Alan Greenspan. It's that simple. Well, you got to just, simple Google search. Maybe they didn't have internet back in Alan Greenspan's day. Now, this is all about FDR. FDR called up the gold. If you're in America in 1933 or something, in 1933, I think, FDR said, you have to give me all your gold. And then Nixon's going to take us off the gold standard 40 years later. So this is all in the context of the Federal Reserve. So the federal banks, the Federal Reserve, you got the Federal Reserve Board, 7 members. All the members are nominated and confirmed. Nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate. So it's a very elitist board. Only 7 members on the Federal Reserve Board, and they are in charge of 12 regional branches. There's federal banks all throughout the country, and for a bank in America to be solvent, to be accredited, to be officially sanctioned, to be an official bank, that bank has to put 10% of all the deposits that goes into that bank into their account at their branch in the Federal Reserve. So for the banks of Colorado, they have to put 10% of all the money that they have into an account in Kansas City in one of the branches, one of the 12 regional branches of the Federal Reserve. Then you have the 7-member Federal Reserve branch or several Federal Reserve Board. And of course, all this happened in 1913, so it's about 100 years, over 100 years old. The 16th Amendment is going to get ratified, signed by President Taft in 1913. And then that's the beginning of 1913. The end of 1913, Congress is going to create the Fed by passing the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. So Jerome Powell, he's the chair of the Federal Reserve today. The U.S. Department of the Treasury prints the U.S. dollar. That's used, these Federal Reserve notes right here. This is a Federal Reserve note, and all this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So that's legal tender. It's money, right? It's a Federal Reserve note is what it is. And it's the Federal Open Market Committee that sets the monetary policy of the United States. Okay, so FDR. Who is this FDR? What's this FDR doing? He gets in there, right? He issues Executive Order 6102. 6102? I'm sorry, but if you're issuing over 6,000 executive orders, I'm not going to listen to any of them. You get maybe one major executive order, maybe 2 or 3, but not 6,000. Jesus fucking Christ, Executive Order 6102 was issued within a month of FDR's inauguration. So 6,000 executive orders within a month? Surely that can't be true. April 5th, 1933, FDR passes a law forbidding the hoarding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. So 1933, the 48 states, right, the logo map, not the empire, just the 48, the Union of States. So this is an order made with authority given to him by the Trading with the Enemy Act of 1917, as amended by the Emergency Banking Act the previous month. So, Enemy Act of 1917, Woodrow Wilson pops his head up again, right, because the World War I measure is going to be used in order to get everybody's gold. Let's just take everybody's gold. So, it said no hoarding of gold. You're allowed to keep a little bit of gold. But essentially, if you had, a collection, if you had some gold bullion and gold coins and gold certificates, unless you're the enemy of America, you had to give your gold up to the U.S. government. Now, the U.S. government wasn't just stealing it. They were paying the going rate, which is $21 per ounce. By May 10th, 1933, the U.S. government had taken in $300 million worth of gold coins and $470 million worth of gold certificates. The price of gold from the Treasury for international transaction was then raised by the Gold Reserve Act from $21 an ounce to $35 an ounce, which devalued the dollar since the U.S. dollar was gold-based, setting the gold price to $35. There was an immediate profit that was made of $14 per ounce that the U.S. government had purchased. So it was a smart decision to take everybody's gold in America and put it in Fort Knox. Now, the government had confiscated, most of the time people didn't get prosecuted, but there's a few cases the government had confiscated $13 million worth of gold double eagles. Gold double eagles, a Swiss company had paid a U.S. business for safekeeping, but the U.S. government took that Swiss company's gold, and the U.S. business, they had to have been a loss. One dude tried to take 5,000 ounces of gold out of the bank, but he was greeted by federal agents, and then everybody's gold being taken away was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1935, Norman v. Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company. So another Supreme Court case, 1935, Norman v. Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Company. So is it okay for the federal government? Can Donald Trump right now order everybody's, not just gold, but silver? He loves gold, right? He also loves gilded gold, so he loves copper, right? He's big into platinum and copper, and let's see, what else? So gold, silver, he could just order everybody's platinum, gold, silver, copper, whatever, he could just order it all, take it off because of the Emergency Banking Act or something and the Gold Reserve Act or some shit. Some sort of magic trick. So, $35 per ounce is $691 in 2019 terms. I think the price of gold is like $8,000 per ounce or some shit. But Americans were paid $21 per troy ounce, and a troy ounce, of course, is 20 pennyweights, and a pennyweight is 24 grains, and a grain is 65 milligrams. So 65 milligrams equals a grain, 24 grains equals a pennyweight, 20 pennyweights equals a troy ounce. So Americans were paid $21 per troy ounce, and then it was turned around. He changed the price. He attached the price of gold to the American dollar, set the price at $35, immediate $14 profit per ounce that they purchased. And if you were hoarding gold, so they didn't go after just, you had a couple golds here, also specific gold things, specific gold prints, rare collections, shit like that. But if you're hoarding gold and you didn't sell your gold to the American government, technically speaking, the American government could fine you $10,000 and throw you in prison for 10 years. So people are pissed off about the Obamacare mandate because you'd be fined $400, in 2020 terms, which is $400, right? $10,000 back then was at $1 million today, and 10 years in prison if you didn't just offer all the gold that you had, that you weren't, everything besides your personal collection. So you couldn't hoard gold, right? You just had your own, maybe $100 worth of gold. Anything over 100, you had to, give to the government. If not, go to jail for 10 years, $10,000 fine. Now, for nearly 40 years, gold is going to be fixed at $35 per ounce until Nixon, Richard Milhouse Nixon. Now, both of these are liberal changes. They did change the system. So that's important to note. A liberal change at the time. Nixon takes us off the gold standard, and that destroys the Bretton Woods system. So the Bretton Woods system is destroyed. Nixon takes us off the gold standard. The U.S. dollar is now based on a freely floating fiat currency. And that's the exact same thing as Bitcoin. It's freely floating fiat currency. It's money that you think has value backed by nothing. No commodities, no precious metals, no marijuana, nothing. Just a piece of paper, a fancy piece of paper that the U.S. Treasury Department printed up. And this is 1971. So we're going to have Treasury notes, but this is up until 1971. So this is the beginning of the American dollar. This is when the American dollar stands on its own 2 feet. And then 1974, 41 years later, Gerald Ford overturned the banning of gold ownership. So most of the gold was given up voluntarily. Most of the gold is stored at Fort Knox, or so we're told. It's probably underneath Wall Street. But you couldn't, hoard gold. So nobody in America could actually buy bars of gold. And after 1974, you could. So 1974 overturns FDR's, banning of owning gold or hoarding gold. So 1970, for 41 years, right, if you had gold, you had to give it up to the federal government. Now, some people say that it was FDR who took America off the gold standard with the, the gold buyback, and he took all the gold, and then he went ahead and attached the price of gold to the dollar. So that took us off the old gold standard. There was a gold standard, but then they took it off that standard and created his own gold standard. And then by collecting all the gold, he set the price. So he just basically, I do not believe that, FDR did not take us off the gold standard. If anything, he solidified the gold standard. He took $800 million worth of gold from the American people. So he took nearly $1 billion worth of gold from the American people. And why did he take the gold? So that way the U.S. dollar would be strengthened. And then by tying the U.S. dollar to gold, that made a transition possible in 1971. It made it possible for Nixon just to take us completely off the gold standard. 1971 was the Nixon shock. He tried several things, the price and wages freeze and some other shit. So the transition was possible because the U.S. dollar had been dick riding on gold for nearly 40 years. So for 40 years, when people thought about the U.S. dollar, they thought about how you could get gold with that dollar. It was backed by gold. So the U.S. dollar was backed by lots of gold that was taken from the American people. So I think it solidified the gold standard. So I can see how the change is, different. It's a departure from the past, so it's a liberal change. But it made the transition possible for Nixon to take us off the gold standard. But I think it solidified the gold standard because for 40 years the U.S. dollar was tied to gold. How much is gold? $35 an ounce for 40 years. So they were tied together. They were synonymous, one and the same. So that's a gold standard on crack. That's a big gold standard. I'm not sure what the old gold standard was, but that seems to be a pretty solid gold standard. Now, while some people like to say that gold always wins and gold is good, gold is great. Gold, I think there's more industrial uses for silver, but silver didn't get as much, fanfare throughout the years. If you're not one, you're last. If you're not first, you're last, right? So gold usually wins, but it doesn't always win. The American dollar since 1971, you know, the greenback has been able to stand on its own 2 feet without being backed by any goddamn thing whatsoever. Cannabis coin. There's a digital currency called cannabis coin that's backed by marijuana. For one cannabis coin, for every cannabis coin out there, you get a gram of marijuana. So it's tied to the price of marijuana. So there's actually a commodity that it's tied to. Now, while the U.S. dollar is fiat, is gold any better? Gold is just a rock, right? Some metal found in rock or some shit. While gold usually wins, those, you know, with the gold makes the rules. That's the golden rule. It doesn't always win. During the 2008 Great Recession, the price of gold went down. So gold is not recession-proof, like James Gandolfini said that his Sopranos were. So gold is not recession-proof. Once the U.S. dollar gained, then the price of gold went back up, but the price of gold went down during the 2008 Great Recession. So gold's great, gold's good, but gold isn't perfect. It's not inviolable. It's not inviolate. It's not perfect. It's not any of those big fancy words for perfect. So gold is not perfect. The U.S. dollar has been holding its own for, 50 years. I hear the U.S. dollar is still doing okay. So it's still floating. A lot of people want to take the U.S. dollar out of the market, but a lot of people trust the U.S. dollar. It has a lot of confidence. It's been the world reserve currency. We have, that benefits America economically because a lot of the world trades in the U.S. dollar. It's like the middle of the road, currency medium of exchange. So yeah, that's gold. That's what happened. FDR took everybody's fucking gold. We got on the gold standard big time. Then Nixon took us off the gold standard. Then it was just the dollar, right? Then the cheese stood alone. And how did the cheese standing alone do? The dollar's been doing okay. So even though it's fiat currency and all this, maybe, the Treasury and the Fed and all this talking and, thinking and coming up with this and that, maybe it puts a little bit more confidence in the world, because for the longest time, Max Kaiser and his wife has been predicting the fall of the U.S. dollar, the U.S. greenback, but it hasn't happened. And so that's good for America, right? You bank on this this fiction that a dollar has value. Does this piece of paper mean anything to you? It does. Good. Okay. Whew. And yeah, that's FDR took everybody's gold. Nixon took us off the gold standard. There's lots of different currencies, commodities. They use wampum. They use beaver pelts. They used tobacco, like cannabis coin, like I said, is a gram of marijuana. We were backed by gold, silver, and gold for the longest time. When Jesus sold for 30 pieces of silver. So gold and silver has been used forever. The Spanish dollar is what the colonial government had used for the longest time, and then that helped form the Continental. And the Continental ain't worth jack shit. I mean, that's how they raised money for the Revolutionary War, tricked everybody into buying Continentals. So the first U.S. dollar was an abysmal failure. And the British were counterfeiting like motherfuckers, so that, hurt the Continental. You had a war, and then you had to print up this, fancy money. But how fancy could they print shit up back then? The British could do just as good of a job, if not better. And, yeah, so hopefully Donald Trump doesn't take all of our gold, right? I mean, hopefully he doesn't call up the gold for this coronavirus. It's a war, right? We're fighting a war. He's a wartime he's fighting a war on terror still, so he is literally a wartime president, but also he's wartime president for the virus. And Donald said that the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, is a bigger enemy to America than China. So when it comes to money and currency and economics, China as a competitor, more as a competitor, not an enemy. But anyways, the Federal Reserve is a bigger enemy than China? The Federal Reserve is a worse enemy than China. And we just gave them motherfuckers $500 billion. Does that sound right to you? It doesn't sound right to me. Anyways, I'm John Masters, 9:35, Thursday, April 2nd. 2020, Southern Colorado. Peace!